Order, please. Begin the day routine presenting reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Table reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notice of motion. The Honourable Minister responsible for the Advisory Council on the Status of Women.
Not you, Jamie.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sherry Fitch has contributed significantly to literacy and literature as an author of poetry and stories for children and adults, as a promoter of reading to children, and as the spokesperson for the Read to Me Nova Scotia Family Literacy Program, which provides books for newborn babies and literacy information to new parents. Whereas she has made Nova Scotia proud as she has traveled across Canada to the United States, Mexico, Belize, Bhutan, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, sharing with all the fun of reading and the importance of accepting differences. Whereas she was honored yesterday by Acadia University with a Doctor of Letters degree and delivered the convocation address. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House extend their thanks and congratulations to Sherry Fitz, award-winning author, educator, literacy activist, and daughter of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May 9th is the 12th anniversary of the tragic Westray mine explosion in which 26 miners were killed and the lives of their families were changed forever. And whereas this tragedy and the ensuing inquiry into its cause dramatically underscored the necessity for government, industry, and all Nova Scotians to put safety in the workplace above all other considerations. And whereas the legacy of Westray will be remembered and appreciated every day a worker returns home safely from their workplace, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House respect and honor the memory of those who died at Westray and ensure that their memory continues to be an inspiration to remain vigilant in the cause of safety in Nova Scotia workplaces. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Mr. Speaker, I now ask that the members of this House rise and observe 1 minute of silence in memory of those who died in the Westray explosion.
All members please rise for a moment of silence. Thank you. Please be seated. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas David Byrne, Matthew Stanley, and Chester Weatherby of Truro were among the major award winners at Mount Allison University's 2004 Spring Convocation. And whereas among the awards earned were that for the highest average in a 4-year commerce course, that for excelling in commerce and being involved in university and community activities, and that for the highest standing in mathematics. And whereas David Byrne, Matthew Stanley, and Chester Weatherby shared the major awards platform with 10 other students from Nova Scotia, therefore be it resolved that all members congratulate David Byrne, Matthew Stanley, and Chester Weatherby the other Nova Scotians who won major awards at the 2004 Mount Allison University Convocation, and wish them well in all of their future endeavors. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honorable Minister responsible for the Advisory Council on the Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Elizabeth Fry Society helps women by developing programs and services in communities for women who have been charged with offenses or are at risk of coming into conflict with the law, by improving the quality of life for the children of these women, by encouraging public awareness and understanding of issues related to women in conflict with the law, and by lobbying for the improvement of conditions for women in local penal institutions and for the changes in the criminal justice system. Whereas the Society honored 5 women this weekend for their leadership in various organizations and on many issues, which earns them the title of Rebel with a Cause, and whereas the tireless efforts of community activists Rose Brooks and Philippa Pictou, women's rights activist Kathy Love, member of the Legislative Assembly Maureen McDonald, and Sister Mary Morris, Executive Director of the Marguerite Centre, have contributed to the betterment of Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate the Elizabeth Fry Society and Rebels Rose Brooks, Philippa Pictou, Kathy Love, Maureen McDonald, and Sister Mary Morris. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this week, May 9th to 15th, is National Police Week across North America. And whereas this annual event helps forge strong partnerships between police agencies and the communities they serve, and whereas Nova Scotian men and women in law enforcement contribute to our safety and well-being, therefore be it resolved that this House shows its respect and admiration for peace officers who serve our communities throughout Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate. And I would also mention, Mr. Speaker, that I think it's appropriate to point out that we have 2 former police officers here in the House, yourself and the member for Colchester North. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. There's a request to revert the order of business back to table reports, regulations, and other papers. Is it agreed? Table reports, regulations, and other papers. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to table the following documents. First of all is the Freedom of Information, Protection of Privacy Advisory Committee report, the government response, the Routine Access Policy Audit report, the Freedom of Information, Protection of Privacy Advisory Committee report, the summary, and finally, the Nova Scotia Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act 2003 annual report, including 1994 to 2003 statistics. Thank you.
Reports are tabled. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Representation of Students in the Governance of Universities.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Kings West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Representation of Students in the Governance of Universities.
Bill 75, entitled An Act Respecting the Representation of Students in the Governance of Universities.
Will this bill be read a second time at a future date? Notice of motion. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteerism moves people to step to where needed and get the job done. And whereas the scourge of fire in rural areas can only be countered by volunteer fire departments. And whereas on Volunteer Awards Night, April 21st, 2004, Mr. Martin Walsh was honored by the municipality of East Hants for his time and work spent as a volunteer fireman with the Kennecook Volunteer Fire Department. Therefore, be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Mr. Martin Walsh for putting his valuable time towards such an important and needed community service. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Big Pond native Gordie Sampson will be releasing his second CD entitled Sunburn in June 2004, and whereas at the age of 33, Gordie Sampson is an accomplished songwriter, singer, guitarist, and producer, and whereas Gordie Sampson and his co-owned recording company Lakewood Sound have won more than 12 awards that include ECMA awards for singing and songwriting, most notably his song Sorry, the Music Industry Association of Nova Scotia Award for Producer of the Year for the production of Natalie McMaster's album In My Hands, Juno Awards, Canadian Country Music Awards, Canadian Radio Music Awards, and so on. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize and congratulate Big Pond, Cape Breton native Gordie Sampson for his many accomplishments and for making all Nova Scotians proud of his rich contribution to music, entertainment, and culture. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester, Muscataba Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the South Colchester ATV Club and the Middle Stewiacke Recreation Association held an immensely successful all-terrain vehicle run on Saturday, and whereas a total of 276 all-terrain vehicles registered and participated in this event from all over Nova Scotia, and whereas the run began Saturday morning with a breakfast and participants being reminded of the importance of preserving land, water, and wildlife in their ATV runs. Therefore, be it resolved that MLAs in this House of Assembly applaud the efforts of the South Colchester All-Terrain Vehicle Club and the Middle Stewiacke Recreation Association for a tremendous day of fun and leisure, and wish them every success in all future endeavors. I ask for waiver notice, Mr. Speaker.
Waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas, in this government's own FAQs on biosolids, they state, once treated to acceptable limits, the liquid is returned to the environment. The solid portions, also referred to as sludge, are further treated and stabilized, reducing the potential for pathogens, disease-causing organisms, and odor. And whereas in their glossary of terms, pathogens are organisms such as bacteria, protozoa, viruses, and parasites causing disease in humans and animals, and whereas some examples of pathogens that can be present in biosolids are salmonella, coliform, hepatitis A, and polioviruses, therefore be it resolved that the Department of Environment and Labour throw out their unenforceable guidelines and after much more public input, bring forward regulations that will protect our environment and the health of our families. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Waiver. Here, no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Halifax, Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Hemlock Ravine, one of the oldest tree stands in Halifax, is a cornerstone in the community and has been extensively damaged by Hurricane Juan, and whereas Ecole Grosvenor Wentworth borders Hemlock Ravine and has been used by the students and staff as a recreational and educational tool since the school was opened, and whereas the Eco Kids Environment Club held fundraising after school dances and has presented a check for $200 to the city to help in the restoration of this community park, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the Eco Kids Environment Club of Grosvenor Wentworth School for their successful fundraisers and their commitment to improving the community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Waverley Fall River, Beaver Bank.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Snowmobile Association of Nova Scotia is a vibrant and excellent run association which honors some members for particular awards on an annual basis. And whereas Daryl Patrickin was honored as the Groomer Operator of the Year for 2004 as a member of the Fall River-based Drift Climbers Snowmobile Club, which is the oldest snowmobile club in existence in Nova Scotia. And whereas Daryl is a stickler for detail, having groomed trails for the drift climbers for the past 5 years, but has gone above and beyond the call of duty by also maintaining and storing the groomer in his property, as well as providing necessary training to others while also ensuring the groomer is painted in bright red every year, therefore making it easily identifiable. Therefore, be it resolved, MLAs commend Daryl Patrickin for winning the Snowmobile Association of Nova Scotia Award this year for top groomer and wish him nothing but continued success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Shabakto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be seeking waiver. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the French immersion program in the Halifax regional school system has had a record of success over the years, and whereas many students and their families work hard to meet the challenges of this valuable and important program, and whereas one of the French immersion schools that has been particularly successful in the constituency of Halifax-Shabakto has been Oxford School, therefore be it resolved that this House congratulate Alexander Theriault and Kathleen Lines, two students enrolled in French immersion at Oxford School, who on May 1st, 2004, won gold and silver medals, respectively, at the Concours d'Oratoire Provincial, provincial French public speaking competition held at Mount St. Vincent University. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice, passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the community of Lawrencetown, Halifax Regional Municipality will mark its 250th anniversary in 2004. Whereas Lawrencetown was the first proprietary township in the province of Nova Scotia after Halifax, was established as a fishing and farming community, and has a long and proud military history. And whereas Lawrencetown will celebrate this anniversary with a grand opening on June 10, 2004, which includes many activities and displays, and with a parade on June the 12th. Therefore, it be resolved that all members of this House congratulate the community of Lawrencetown and all its residents on its 250th anniversary, and it asks for waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas one of Canada's most prodigious scholarships has been awarded to a Chester Basin student, and whereas Brittany Rafuse has been awarded with a $60,000 TD Canada Trust Scholarship for Community Leadership, and whereas Brittany's decisive leadership resulted in the establishment of a youth auxiliary for the Royal Canadian Legion, the first ever established here in Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House of Assembly commend Chester Basin student Brittany Rafuse on winning the prestigious TD Canada Trust Scholarship Award for Community Leadership and wish her every success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Dartmouth Choral Society is celebrating its 50th year of music, and whereas more than 75 choir members, under the direction of conductor Sean Wynott, accompanied by musicians Pamela Burton and Damien Monahan, performed Sing Your Peace, a global celebration of song, including an African Mass, May 7th and 8th, 2004. And whereas another beautiful number was Sing Your Peace Around the World, composed by Gary Ewer and commissioned by the Dartmouth Choral Society to recognize this special anniversary. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate and thank the Dartmouth Choral Society for its continuing contribution to the cultural life of Dartmouth and wish the Society members similar success in all its 50th anniversary activities. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Acadia University has a solid reputation for innovative ideas that have put them ahead of the class, and whereas Acadia University has implemented a campus-wide waste resource management program to lessen the effects on the environment, with a 53% reduction in the amount of waste with a strict waste disposal system throughout the campus, as well as the annual Dump and Run program, where students have a giant yard sale to dispose of household items they no longer need. And whereas the Resource Recovery Board has awarded Acadia University the Institute of the Year Award in recognition of the waste management program, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Acadia University for this award from the Resource Recovery Board and recognize the contributions made by Acadia University to improve the environment. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on May 8, 2004, the community of Lucasville held a centennial birthday celebration at the Wallace Lucas Community Centre for Miss Alma Lucas, who was born 100 years ago today, May 10, 1904. And whereas Miss Lucas has always been a source to the people of Lucasville for their rich and significant history, and whereas Miss Lucas, affectionately known as Billy, has made a century's worth of contributions to her community, friends, and family, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House join Miss Lucas and the community of Lucasville in celebrating the amazing life that will continue for many years. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passes without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the UCCB Capers women's soccer team captured their first Atlantic University Sports Championship, defeating their arch rivals, the Dalhousie Tigers. And whereas they capped off a highly successful season for the Capers, who finished the regular season with a sparkling record of 10 wins, 0 losses, and 3 ties, earning them the distinction of being the number 4 ranked team in Canada. And whereas this earned the team a trip to Montreal, where they participated in the CIS National Championship. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this Legislative Assembly congratulate the UCCB women's soccer team on a most gratifying season and establishing themselves as a force to be reckoned with in university soccer. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Cadet Boxing Championships were held in St. Catharines, Ontario from April 29th until May 1st, 2004, and whereas Andre White of Millville, a member of the Tommy Gordon Boxing Club and the only Cape Bretoner among the Nova Scotia competitors, represented his province with pride and skill, and whereas Andre White won the gold medal in the heavyweight division, with Nova Scotia winning a total of 3 gold, 3 silver, and 3 bronze. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House congratulate Andre White and all the members of the Nova Scotia competitors on a job well done. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on January the 9th, 2004, lobster boat captain Michael Muse, crewman Adam Clattenburg, and passenger Colin McNeil were working aboard the Miss Rebecca, 45 minutes away from Port Medway Wharf, and whereas Adam Clattenburg was hauled overboard in the frigid water by a rope attached to lobster pots and was heroically rescued by Muse and McNeil, who put Adam's well-being ahead of their own safety, and whereas the Clattenburg family is nominating Michael Muse and Colin McNeil for the Decoration for Bravery Award from the Governor General for saving their son's life, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House commend Mr. Muse and Mr. McNeil for their courage in a life and death situation and wish them well as their names are submitted for the Decoration of Bravery Award. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Justin Munden of the Halifax Mooseheads had an outstanding rookie year with the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League team, whereas Justin plays every shift and every game to the best of his ability, and whereas this Brookside resident serves as a positive role model of hard work and determination to young people in our community. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Justin Munden on his rookie year with the Mooseheads, with best wishes on and off the ice in his future endeavors. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Monsieur le Président, par la présente, j'avise que je proposerai une date ultérieure l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que le père Anselme Chiasson, un grand folkloriste et historien acadien né à Chéticon, est décédé le 25 avril 2004. Et attendu que le père Anselme est reconnu de près et de loin pour sa contribution à la promotion du patrimoine acadien. Et attendu que nous fêtons cette année le 400e anniversaire de l'installation des Français en Acadie, que le père Anselme a promu avec ses recherches et ses livres. Qu'il soit résolu que cette Assemblée reconnaît le révérend père Anselme Chiasson comme l'un des Acadiens qui ont le plus largement contribué à la promotion des Acadiens de cette province. Monsieur le Président, je propose l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Speaker, I hereby give notice on future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Reverend Anselme Chiasson, a great Acadian historian and folklorist, died April 25, 2004. And whereas Reverend Chiasson was recognized by various regional, national, and international organizations. And whereas this being the 400th anniversary of the French settlement in the early Acadie that Reverend Chiasson promoted through his research and his books. Therefore be it resolved that the members of this House recognize the contributions of Reverend Chiasson, a native of Nova Scotia, to the promotion of a distinctive fabric of this province, the Acadians. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Denny Clyke, a Truro native, was placed in the honor roll of the Truro Sport Heritage Society for his outstanding performances in softball, fastball, baseball, and hockey. And whereas Denny Clyke was named Nova Scotia Softball Player of the Year in 1969, was a member of the 1969 Maritime Senior A hockey champion, the New Glasgow Rangers. By the way, the president of that year was the premier. Played pro hockey with the Columbus Checkers and Toledo Blazers, and was a member of at least 3 Maritime champion baseball teams. And whereas Denny Clyke was a member of the legendary Dairy Queen fastball team, won 2 batting titles, 3 home run titles, 2 MVP awards, and earned all Canadian honors 3 times. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate Denny Clyke on being named to the honor roll of the Truro Sport Heritage Society and recognize his outstanding achievement in 4 sports. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas exchange students are ambassadors representing their local area as well as their country. And whereas the Air Cadets are a proud and important wing of our military traditions. And whereas on May 20th, 2004, Cadet Maria McMillan of South Rawdon will represent the 652 Milford and District Air Cadets, her province, and her country for 2 weeks as an exchange student.
Order, please. The Honourable Member Hants East has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas on May 20th, 2004, Cadet Maria McMillan of South Rawdon will represent the 652 Milford and District Air Cadets, her province, and her country for 2 weeks as an exchange student in Singapore. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Maria McMillan on being chosen to represent the 652 Milford and District Air Cadets in Singapore and wish her well as she carries our flags abroad. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Joseph Howe was a visionary, a poet, an astute politician, a superb newspaper editor and publisher, and a great orator. And whereas Joseph Howe was called in his time the greatest man in British North America and the father of freedom of the press in Canada. And whereas Joseph Howe is widely considered to be Nova Scotia's most accomplished citizen, having contributed substantially to government, journalism, and education. And whereas Joseph Howe became a member of the provincial government in 1836 and for the next 12 years fought for responsible government in Nova Scotia, and largely owing to his statesmanship, Nova Scotia was the first province in British North America to win responsible government. And whereas Joseph Howe dedicated his entire adult life to this province and this country, serving as Premier, Federal Minister, and Lieutenant Governor, and whereas this is the 200th anniversary...
Order, please. They're only allowed 3 whereases in the resolution outside of order. Sorry. Next resolution, please. Thank you. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nigerian native Father Christian Watarali was one of 950 students who graduated on May 2nd from St. Francis Xavier University, and whereas during his time at St. FX, Father Watarali also served the people of Heatherton as their parish priest for Immaculate Conception Roman Catholic Church, and whereas Father Watarali will use what he has learned during his years at St. FX to continue his work to improve the economy in his home community of Enugu, Nigeria. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House thank Father Christian Watarali for the many contributions he has made to the community of Heatherton, congratulate him on receiving his degree from St. Francis Xavier University, and wish him success as he returns home to Nigeria to continue his work. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Mr. Waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas annually the St. Margaret's Masters Hockey League recognizes a player for dedication or effort in memory of legendary local hockey player Richard Doubleday, and whereas this hockey season Dwayne Van Snick has been named as the winner of the Doubleday Award, whereas Dwayne Van Snick has made a valuable contribution to the game of hockey for many years. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Dwayne Van Snick on receiving the Richard Doubleday Memorial Award. I ask for a waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 18th Emergency Health Services, who last week got purple tags for certification in community paramedicine, are breaking ground in a new field called paramedicine. And whereas they are the only ones in Canada and in North America, and whereas the 18 paramedics all work on Briar and Long Island's Digby County, performing tasks that are far beyond the normal paramedics do for their communities. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate these 18 paramedics upon their successful completion of their training and wish them well in the service of their community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be reading this on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency Service is dedicated to enhancing and preserving the quality of life, property, and environment for citizens throughout Halifax Regional Municipality. Whereas the Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency Service was formed in 1754, making it Canada's oldest organized fire service. And whereas the Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency Service will celebrate its 250th anniversary with an official ceremony on Monday, May 31st at the Grand Parade Square in Halifax. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House extend our appreciation and our congratulations to Chief Michael E. Eddy and all members of the Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency Service for their commitment and dedication to duty and public service over the years. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Mr. Speaker, I'll try this again, if I can. Whereas this is the 200th anniversary of Joseph Howe's birth, and Joseph Howe was a visionary, a poet, an astute politician, a superb newspaper editor and publisher in a great orator, and whereas this former premier and lieutenant governor was called in his time the greatest man in British North America and the father of the freedom of the press in Canada, and whereas Joseph Howe is widely considered to be Nova Scotia's most accomplished citizen, having contributed substantially to government, journalism, and education, and fighting successfully to ensure Nova Scotia became the first province in British North America to win responsible government. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House nominate Joseph Howe in the CBC's greatest Canadian competition. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Glooskap Curling Club Javon Martin has successfully defended her Nova Scotia Ladies Masters Curling Championship, and whereas Ms. Martin and her teammates Carol Hampsey,
Gwen Miriam and Ruth Marsman came from behind in the provincial final and beat the Mayflowers Ring Cadine Boutelier. And whereas with this win, Ms. Martin and three mates advanced to the Canadian Championships, therefore be resolved the members of this House join me in congratulating Yvonne Martin, Carol Hampsey, Gwen Miriam, and Ruth Marsman on their win at the Nova Scotia Masters Curling Championship and wish them much success in their future curling endeavours. I request waiver.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May 10th to 16th, 2004 is National Nursing Week, and whereas this year's theme, Nursing, Knowledge and Commitment at Work, describes the true character and strength of nurses in Nova Scotia, and whereas innovation, teamwork and leadership are among a few of the stellar qualities shown by our nursing workforce from one end of the province to the other. Therefore, be resolved that all members of the Legislature acknowledge May 10th to 16th as National Nursing Week and extend our appreciation to all nurses throughout our province who, day in, day out, serve as the backbone of our healthcare system. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Mr. Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas gardening is a hobby that is enjoyed by many and which beautifies communities across Nova Scotia, and whereas Bayport, Lunenburg County resident Captain Dick Steele has been growing beautiful rhododendrons which have been appreciated by many people over the years and is recognized as one of the top breeders in North America. And whereas Captain Steele's impressive gardening abilities will be featured on an upcoming episode of the home and garden television show Recreating Eden, an international gardening biography series. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly thank Captain Dick Steele for his ability to enrich our lives with beauty of plants and congratulate him on his upcoming appearance on Recreating Eden. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day, government business, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that you deny leave of the chair and the House resolve in the Committee of the Whole House on Supply.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to stand here and bring some of the issues from my constituency forward here today. Mr. Speaker, 15 minutes really doesn't give me an opportunity to do justice to the range of things that I could talk about on behalf of the residents of Halifax Needham. But I want to start first by letting the members know some of the highlights of the positive things that are going on in my constituency that I think need to be spoke of and supported. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. There's too much noise in the chamber. I'll ask the honourable members to take their conversations outside, please. The honourable member for Halifax Needham has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I get up this morning and got my car to come here, as I drive out the end of the lane where I live, I see the Eisville Playground, and currently under construction is quite a large extension to that playground, which will result in a wading spray kind of area for kids in the summertime to be able to go and cool off. And in that general area, there are a number of daycare centers that will certainly take full advantage of this new facility, and as well, of course, all of the families in the neighborhood. And Mr. Speaker, this playground is being expanded thanks to the hard work of residents of Halifax Needham. I think of Jane Hawes and the Nosses and families in the area who have worked really hard raising money and looking to find a way to financially support an expansion and an upgrading of that playground. And I think it would be appropriate at this time, Mr. Speaker, to thank them for their efforts, but also to thank the regional councillor for the area, Councillor Jerry Blumenthal, who, after 10 years of being the councillor for our area, has essentially announced that he won't be reoffering in the fall. And I know that residents of my constituency would wish Mr. B all the best as he goes forward into retirement. Not too far from the Iceville Playground, Mr. Speaker, is the North End Rink, which is the only outdoor rink of its kind in the HRM. And a few years ago, this was the dream of a young man with a young family in my constituency whose name is Brian McDonald, who had this idea that the tennis courts could be used for outdoor skating facilities. And he set about to do some research, and then he organized other people in our neighborhood. And the North End Rink has become a very, very successful recreational, community-based program. It has expanded now so that there essentially are 3 excellent skating areas enjoyed by young and old alike throughout the municipality. And people come from all over to participate and take part in this rink, which essentially is maintained for the most part by a very, very strong and active and committed group of volunteers from Halifax Needham. So both of these groups, the Iceville Playground Association and the North End Rink, are to be congratulated for their strong commitment to community and to healthy living and recreation. In the not too distant future, in the first weekend of June, Mr. Speaker, there's going to be a festival in Halifax Needham called the Northern Lights Festival. It's the first, it will be the first of its kind here in Nova Scotia, although it's quite common, I think, for light and lantern festivals on the West Coast. And this is being organized again by community organizations, Veith House, Ward 5, some of the local churches, and it will be held the first weekend in June. Mr. Speaker, recently I learned about a young entrepreneur in my community whose name is Michelle Strum, who, along with her partner David Eisner, own the Halifax Backpackers Cafe on Gottingen Street. And they have just been awarded a Canadian Youth Business Foundation Award as young entrepreneurs for their work in terms of community leadership. And I think they're to be congratulated for the initiatives. They are the folks who are behind the regeneration in the Gottingen Street area, the organizing of a merchants association, the initiation of the Sunday street market in that area. And they're very active in the community, creating employment opportunities in the community, having a lot of involvement with children and youth activities in the community. And I can't think of any young people who would be more deserving of this national award. There are so many positive things that are going on in my community. It's hard to focus on just a few. The North End Clinic on Gottingen Street is a very, very active place. The Primary Health Project has been going very well, and quite soon, Dr. Margaret Casey, who was a physician at the North End Clinic for a number of years, for many years, will be receiving an honorary doctorate from Dalhousie in recognition of her work both here and elsewhere. And I can't think of anybody else who would be more deserving of that recognition, which will be bestowed, I think, at the university convocation for the medical school students. Mr. Speaker, the Central Halifax Community Association and the North End Action Group for a Nonviolent Community are initiating a new award for a junior high student at St. Pat's Alexandra School, a bursary this year. And this, I think, is a very positive development, and those folks are to be congratulated for the initiative that they're showing with respect to that endeavor. St. Joe's A. McKay School is about to embark on a school exchange trip with students from Ontario. The grade 6 class at St. Joe's A. McKay will be visiting a community in Ontario, and then the children from that community will come back here. And the teachers and the principal and the parents and the students of St. Joe's A. McKay have been working very hard, doing fundraising and preparing for what is, you know, a substantial undertaking. And I'm sure the children will remember this experience for many, many years to come. And this kind of activity is all done outside of the hours of work in the school, and requires a great deal of love and dedication and commitment on the part of the teachers and certainly parents. So they are to be commended for this initiative. St. George's Round Church, their YouthNet program, which is an after-school program for children, are in the process of developing an outward bound program for children from the inner city community in the north end of Halifax and Halifax Needham. And I'm very pleased to say that I've had an opportunity to meet with the coordinator of YouthNet, Barbara, along with two young women from the north end of Halifax, Natasha Jeffries and Lorraine Clayton. And together we're in the process of developing a mentoring program for young women, young girls from the inner city. We felt this was a really important thing to undertake. There are quite a few programs in the community for young boys, particularly sports programs like basketball and baseball and these kinds of things, yet it seems that there's an absence of programs for young girls. So we hope to rectify that by developing a mentoring program and really taking advantage of many of the great recreational and educational opportunities that we have available to us in this province. Not so long ago, Tracy Jones, who was the branch manager at the North Branch Library in Halifax, left to take up a new position within the library system here in HRM. And although we miss Tracy from the North Branch Library, we all wish her very well. She was at the library for many, many years and provided very strong programming leadership and other kinds of leadership. She was a real mentor to the young men and women from that community. And she has been replaced now by Patricia Sutherland as the head librarian at the North Branch Library. And I know people in our community wish Patricia well in her new position. The last thing I'm going to mention before I talk about some of the needs that need resolving and attention to, Mr. Speaker, is the development of a new theatre company in Halifax, One Light Theatre. I did a resolution here not so long ago, Mr. Speaker, on One Light Theatre. It's a wonderful, wonderful new theatre on Gottingen Street in a space called The Crib, and I would highly recommend the productions that are done by this small theatre company. The artistic director of the theatre is also the proprietor of the Persian Bazaar on Gottingen Street, and he comes from a very strong tradition in the arts and in classical theatre. He's a graduate of the Dalhousie Theatre School, and I believe his father was a very well-known director an actor from Iran. And so Sahin is a very strong artist in his own right. His influence on the theater company is very obvious. And his wife, his partner, was a page here, Maggie Stewart. And she herself has many talents in the arts, but is currently, I think, in her second last year of law school, Mr. Speaker. And I think the members of this House would wish them well in both their business, the Persian Bazaar, which I would highly recommend. If people like really fresh produce, nuts, and things like this, their produce is fantastic. Mr. Speaker, I often like to stand here in my place and talk about my constituency. I love my constituency. I think I'm the only member here in the legislature that can stand and say that we make ships and beer in my riding. We have the shipyard, and we also not only have Olin's, but we have Garrison and Propeller, the small microbreweries in Halifax, Needham. But you know, it's a diverse riding with a lot of outstanding initiatives, as you can see from what I've had to say so far. But Mr. Speaker, there are also some unresolved issues in Halifax, Needham, and I would like to, in the time that I have left, mention Africville, Mr. Speaker. The first speech I had an opportunity to give on the floor of this legislature back in 1998, in response to the throne speech, I asked the government to consider making a formal apology to the former residents of Africville. Here, 6 years later, I stand in my place and I ask once again that we acknowledge the wrong that occurred in that community. We look at the report of the rapporteur of the United Nations, and we do the right thing. And I'm looking forward to the day, Mr. Speaker, when I can stand in my place and respond to a government minister who will stand up and take this necessary step of recognizing the wrong that has occurred there, apologizing, and moving forward with the kind of reparation that will bring closure to this very important issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. We recognize the honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great honor to stand in this legislature and speak about an issue that is, I think, one of the most pressing issues that faces Nova Scotia today. It's the issue of democratic reform. I'd like to say at the outset, Mr. Speaker, that each time that, or many times when I raise the issue of democratic reform with others, it's difficult to tell you just how often people tell me that it's not the stuff that gets us elected. It's not the stuff that paves our road. It's not the stuff that addresses the pressing problem of wait times in our province. Well, I believe that this is the stuff that puts bread on the table of Nova Scotians that ultimately will pave our roads and will, over time, address issues like wait times. I would argue that this is the most important issue over the long term that faces our province. Because through renewing the institutions and the inspirations of political leadership in this province, I think that we will do better and we will make better decisions. Each year, thousands of people come into this beautiful legislature and they listen to the history that exists in Nova Scotia. The greatest part of the history of Nova Scotia began in this very room, in this chamber, by the gentleman who sits at the end of the room, Joseph Howe. People hear about our wonderful history, how this was the seat of responsible government outside Britain in the British Empire. And they hear about how Joseph Howe passionately and successfully, just down the hall, argued for freedom of the press. On February 2nd, Mr. Speaker, you will recall the day when many people gathered in this room and were inspired by Michael Botry, who joins us in the gallery today, the executive director of the Joseph Howe Institute, the initiative. when we spoke so proudly about being a Nova Scotian. The government that Joseph Howe envisioned was one that ensured that the government served the will of its citizens. Joseph Howe's passion was to ensure that the decision makers in this province ultimately reflected in their decisions the values, the choices, the ideas, the will of the people, whether that's in law, whether that's in business, whether that is most importantly in this legislature. And I was interested to note recently in reading about Joseph Howe that he said in his own words in the book, Joseph Howe, Voice of Nova Scotian, without the Nova Scotians reports, and that was his newspaper, you'll recall, Mr. Speaker, of the legislature debates, the country would have been left in almost total ignorance of the measures urged and the sentiments avowed in the Assembly, and have been about as incapable of judging of the conduct of the representatives as if they had assembled on the moon. And I'm sure there are times when many of we honorable members wonder whether or not we in this chamber are on the moon. To whom are we speaking? And who is listening to what it is that we have to say? How often do our constituents ask us questions like whether the House is sitting, what our positions are on subjects that we've taken strong positions on, and how often are we asked about our behavior, about the way that we treat each other, about the respect that we show each other, about the relevance of the issues that we raise on a day-to-day basis. There is a growing public disillusionment and cynicism about the way that politics is done generally, and this is reflected in the voter turnout that we see at the polls every time we have election time. This is reflected in polls that continuously suggest that people feel that politicians are corrupt. I'm here to say that that's not so. But last Thursday morning, I was at a breakfast where a woman was talking about a new vision for Halifax, and she spoke about the need for young people to be involved in this, and she conducted an experiment where she asked young people to describe for them what the tenets of leadership were. And after some deliberation, these young people came back and they said, Ms. Brown, we don't like the word leadership because we believe that leaders are people who break their promises. It is essential that we, as political leaders, ask ourselves questions about why people are losing faith in the very institutions that are intended to serve them. Addressing these problems is our responsibility. It is the responsibility of the men and women who are in this chamber. I was pleased to see just last week when the honourable member from Kings South provided each member of the House with a report on some work that's happening at a national level. What I found most interesting, Mr. Speaker, is that this reported on work that was being done by our neighbours in Prince Edward Island, and our neighbours in New Brunswick, in Quebec, in Ontario, in British Columbia, the Government of Canada, the City of Vancouver, and so many other places. What they are recognizing is that the institutions that were put in place a long time ago don't, as effectively as they can, serve the needs of everyday people here in Canada. I know there is support for reform and government reform in this House. I've spoken to the Leader of the Official Opposition about this. Clearly there is interest. In fact, the Leader of the Official Opposition has some background and understanding of the challenges that face the institutions of politics and government today. What I suggest, Mr. Speaker, is that we stop whispering about this very important issue, that we speak out loudly about the interests of government reform, because at the end of the day, those are the issues, I would argue, that are going to improve the roads, the wait times, the education system, and the fiscal situation in our province. The word Democrat, Mr. Botry recently pointed out to me, was a hot potato back in Joseph Howe's time. It's interesting to note in our time that the word idealism is today associated with a notion of naivety. And that to say that we're speaking about vision is to suggest that we're somehow being unpragmatic. And too little do we hear words in this House like hope, dreams, heart, and love. But that is the stuff that rests with the people of Nova Scotia. How much of our energy is spent in the tribal partisanship, pointing fingers, pounding our chest, pointing fingers I often hear toward our party. If anyone wants a list of Liberal mistakes, I can make a list and it will be a long one. If anyone wants a list of mistakes that are made by all of these parties, we can all make a long list. We have, at the bottom line, serious challenges in our province, and the challenge comes down to political leadership. We have in our province the second highest debt of any province in this country. We have the second lowest level of scholastic education scores in public education. We have perhaps the worst state of health amongst all of the citizens in Canada. And we have perhaps the worst roads in the entire country. And most importantly, most distressingly, too many of our young people are losing their hope in a viable future. And if that doesn't wake us up in the morning, nothing will. I believe that the honorable men and women who are in this legislature are optimistic, hopeful people, Mr. Speaker. They believe in the best of human nature. And over the long term, democratic renewal, the stuff that members of each of these three parties believe in, is fundamentally what we are about. It is the thing that will take us to where we belong. It involves instilling hope, especially in our young people, inspiring men and women to get involved in politics, and opening the doors of this incredible institution. Over the long term, this will address the problems of our debt, our health, our wait time, our roads, our farmers. I believe this starts with ensuring that we are better connected to the concerns of everyday Nova Scotians, and that begins with political democratic renewal. Renewal, as difficult as it may be for us to hear in this legislature, renewal begins with an acceptance that the problems that we face in Nova Scotia are ultimately political failures, a failure of leadership of one kind or another that can't be attributed to one party or another. And if we are to address the problems that exist in this province, we must examine the responsiveness of our institutions, elections, the workings of this House, the workings of Cabinet, the workings of the civil servants, in short, our connection to the people. In the 200th year of Joseph Howe's birth, surely it is the time that we invoke the spirit of Canada's most important visionary, a Nova Scotian who reported from this gallery, who sat in opposition, who sat in government, and who sat as our premier. There would be plenty for Howe to talk about 200 years after his birth, because a report just 2 years ago by a professor at UBC indicated, after assessing the electoral democracy in Canada, determined that Nova Scotia, unfortunately, was the least democratic. In a legislature that is so grossly underrepresented by women and visible minorities, surely we owe it to ourselves to do better, to ask better questions and step out from time to time of the tribal partisanship that goes with our party allegiances. A belief that we together can do better, to make a lasting impact on the functioning of government, is what we're paid to do. One thing is absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, and that is that I don't have all the answers. But like many of the people in this chamber and many Nova Scotians, I have many questions. 1.5 years ago, our party presented a package of ideas under the heading of citizen-centered democracy. It spoke about the need for us to reduce manipulation by government, about engaging citizens, about keeping in touch with citizens, about effectively opening this House of Assembly, of making a more open and accessible government. But most importantly, it set out many issues of great importance for further study and consultation. Study and consultation is what we can do with an all-party committee that could be spearheaded by a member of this legislature to explore the issues that are being explored in Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, Ontario, British Columbia, and Quebec. We have a proud history in this province, Mr. Speaker. This beautiful little part of the world has been in the past a beacon for democratic renewal, and it can be that again. But it has to start here, in this legislature, in this chamber, as it did with Joseph Howe many years ago, with enough of us admitting that we can do better and getting down to the business of making it better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I recognize now Member Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to very much say that I enjoyed the comments of the previous speaker. There certainly is, without question, a democratic deficit that exists, possibly at all levels of government. But today, Mr. Speaker, if I could, I'd like to speak firstly about the Federal Senate in Ottawa As you know, Mr. Speaker, there has been some debate about the Senate and as to whether or not it should be elected. Myself, I have over the years favored the abolition of the Senate. And just recently I said to one of our Nova Scotia senators, I said, Mr. Senator, you know, I think that if we were to abolish the Senate, we would be doing Canadians a favor. And I said I would go a step further and suggest that we direct the nearly $70 million that is spent on the Senate annually to homelessness and child poverty in this country. We would be, in fact, doing Canadians, and especially the homeless and the impoverished children in this country, a big, big favor. And the senator said, you know, I used to think that the Senate wasn't of any value until I became a senator. And I won't reference the honorable senator's name, but he was of the same opinion that many, many Nova Scotians are. And, you know, you can simplistically justify the Senate, I suppose, by claiming that it should be elected. But the fact of the matter is, presently, there's such an imbalance that if for the next 8 years you were to appoint non-liberals to the Senate, there still would be a Democratic deficit until the year 2020, because presently 2/3 of the senators are liberals. And I have to ask you, what kind of a debate is that? And there's no other democracy in this country and on this planet probably that puts up with that type of imbalance. So the point I was trying to make, Mr. Speaker, is that besides the mandatory retirement policy of 75 years of age, which most Canadians, I would suggest, have difficulty with, there's also some other problems that I see. For example, since 1996, the Senate Committee on Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources dealt with, examined, and scrutinized 23 bills. And since 1996, that Senate committee, according to Aaron Freeman, and Aaron Freeman is a writer for the Democracy Watch publication, but according to Aaron Freeman, the Standing Senate Committee on Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources made one measly, innocuous amendment to an obscure bill. So, Mr. Speaker, although it isn't a priority, I suppose, of Nova Scotians to be debating the Senate when we have so many concerns with health care, education, transportation, gas prices, and things of that nature, I just wanted to point out that it would be extremely difficult to have the larger provinces of Ontario and Quebec concede some of the representation, or at least yield some of that representation to the Atlantic provinces, and especially Nova Scotia, Mr. Chairman.
Order, please. I'll member Cape Breton West on a point of order.
No, Mr. Speaker, I was wondering if the honourable member would entertain a short question.
Would the honourable member Colchester Muscatine Valley entertain a question?
Mr. Speaker, it's always dangerous to entertain a question from the honourable member from Cape Breton West, but knowing that he has a very intelligent question, I will receive a question from the honourable member.
Honourable member Cape Breton West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the risk of being a little over-curious, I'm wondering, his colleague introduced a resolution the other day asking for all party support for an elected Senate. And I hear the honourable member today suggesting we should abolish the Senate. So have they caucused that particular position, or is this his own individual position?
I'll member Colchester Muscatine Valley has the floor.
Yes, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, I could have and should have prefaced my comments by saying, yes, that is my personal position. But I have been decreed over the years, I suppose you could call it, directed by my riding association to speak out against redundancy and waste. And I feel that I'm on good solid ground because the people in my constituency have taken a position on this particular issue. And I will stand behind my constituents. So I do thank the honourable member for from Cape Breton West for giving me the opportunity to speak against the Senate per se. You know, Nova Scotians can tell you, most Nova Scotians, the name of their councillor, the name of their MLA, the name of their MP, and in some cases, I bet you Nova Scotians can tell you the name of their elected school board member. But how many Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, do you know that can tell you the name of their senator and what they represent and who they stand and what they stand for, Mr. Speaker? I just share those views with you because those are the type of views that my riding association over the years has brought to my attention. And Mr. Speaker, I respect all honourable members in this House, and we are entitled to form our own opinions, and especially when we're talking about the chamber of sober second thought. And with all respect to those individuals, I don't feel that it would be appropriate for me to support anything that would give that illustrious chamber any more credibility. Now, Mr. Speaker, how about senatorial reform by way of abolition and directing the funds to the homeless in this country and to child poverty? Now, if it's largesse, and we shouldn't be intimidated against acknowledging that it may be largesse. You know, some of my honourable colleagues probably feel similar. But anyway, I did want to speak about that, and I just want to conclude my talks on this topic by saying you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. And I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. Or any other part of the pig, Mr. Speaker. But look, moving along to something that's near and dear to Nova Scotians and motorists and truckers is the considerable discussion, and to be straightforward, Mr. Speaker, the considerable anger over increases in gasoline prices in recent days. The honourable member for Cape Breton South, through the media at least, I guess, suggested that a provincial tax reduction of 2 cents per litre should be implemented by my government. But you know, in 2 cents a litre would certainly be a start. But what the honourable member forgot to mention is that by way of the federal excise tax on each and every single litre of gasoline and fuel oil that Canadians buy, the federal government swipes away, I perhaps shouldn't say swipes away, takes, confiscates, whatever you want to call it, 10 cents of every litre goes to the federal fuel excise tax. And I think the Honourable Minister of Transportation could tell us that that collectively, coming from the province, equates to approximately $145 million on an annual basis. So here we have that level of government, Ottawa, sitting up there with a huge, huge surplus, billions and billions of dollars, much of it generated by the money they take away from employed Nova Scotians and Canadians through the UI program. They generated much of that surplus through unemployment insurance. But if they are taking away $145 million on an annual basis from the province of Nova Scotia, then wouldn't it be more appropriate for the member from Cape Breton South to stand in his place and challenge his federal cousins in Ottawa to put back some of that money into the hands of Nova Scotians? Now it's just a fraction. We know that it's just a fraction that goes back to Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I think it was in 1996, the federal fuel excise tax went from 8 cents to 10 cents, and they claimed that 2 cents, and I think that 2 cents was implemented by then Finance Minister Paul Martin, Mr. Speaker, if I'm not, yes, Paul Martin, the Prime Minister of the country today, and the justification and weak way of legitimizing the 2 cents was by telling Canadians that the 2 cents per litre was to help them eliminate the annual deficit. Well, as you know, Mr. Speaker, the annual federal deficit has been eliminated for some time now. But has the 2 cents a litre come off? No. No, the 2 cents a litre hasn't come off. Has more money come to Nova Scotia as a consequence of the 10 cents per litre? No. No, it hasn't. Has there been cutbacks to the Canadian health and social transfers? Has there been cutbacks? Probably over the last decade, Nova Scotia has received $1 billion less than it should by way of social transfers. Well, the honourable member, would you like to take time and tell the audience just what exactly we have been cut back? I'd certainly yield the floor to my very... Thank you. Thank you. Well, you know, the honourable member, an agriculture critic with the Liberal caucus, should know pretty soon that in this legislature, many members will stand in their place and admit that we have infirmities, and I think even the previous speaker pointed out that, you know, there's challenges. People engage in tomfoolery. Some people have made mistakes. But, you know, I would challenge any member to stand in his place to say that he or she is perfect, because they don't make such a beast, if I can say with all respect. Just metaphorically, I throw that out. Well, the honourable member for Dartmouth North might be he is an exception to the rule. I think all members would agree that the member for Dartmouth North is an exception to the rule. But I want to point out that this business regarding the increase in gasoline prices has been very, very difficult, not only for Nova Scotians, but for legislators. And I do know that my colleague, the Honourable the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, and the Premier and appropriate bureaucrats have worked very, very hard. They have gone out, personnel from the Minister's Department, met with stakeholders, and are trying to come up with an approach that will help and, at the very least, give Nova Scotians confidence that the price they are paying at the pumps actually reflects a price that is justified because of all the combination of necessary factors. Now, I have never said or even suggested that the oil companies are in collusion, but, you know, Mr. Speaker, some folks are wondering if, in fact, the big major oil companies are somehow doing an end run and sticking it to Nova Scotia consumers and motorists and truckers. But I'm confident that this Premier and the Minister of Service Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations, and my government will, in fact, bring forward measures that will help assist Nova Scotians receive the confidence and comfort that they need when they're filling up at the pumps. Now, moving along from the Senate and gas prices and things of that nature, Mr. Speaker, I would like to speak about my constituency, the beautiful Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley. Mr. Speaker, Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley is made up of some 63 communities. The traditional resource-based industries of farming and agriculture and mining are very, very prominent in Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley. We're blessed to have so much employment in our riding, but Mr. Speaker, as you know, like all honourable members in this House can say, we always could use more. If there's opportunities for more employment, we would certainly welcome that. But we do have 7 sawmills, 4 of them, which are some of the largest in Eastern Canada, are functioning, are operating, and employing hundreds of Nova Scotians and constituents of mine, and we're very, very grateful to the forestry industry and sector in this province. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The motion is carried.
Order. I'd like to recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Chair, would you please call the estimates of the Minister of Community Services?
Yes, well, the estimates of Minister of Community Services. Time is 3:24. We'll just give the Minister an opportunity to get his staff in, or the Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Our Executive Director of Finance and Administration, George Hudson, and his capable associate, Clem Henneberry, are in the chamber and will be joining me momentarily.
Thank you, Minister. I'll recognize the honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid, and we will get the time straightened out momentarily. So you please start off your questioning.
Yeah, I believe it's around 56 minutes. Only had a couple minutes on Friday to start what I was going to talk about. I mentioned that most of my questions will be around the Affordable Housing Agreement, but before I get into that, as I was saying Friday, one of the biggest things that I've noticed over the last 8-9 months is the concern that many Nova Scotians have, which pertains to the housing costs or costs of rentals that they find themselves paying these days. And just even early this morning, when I was up looking through the paper, I decided to look through the classifieds to see what costs are out there for housing. And I was amazed that even just a one-bedroom apartment was $675 to a two-bedroom in Clayton Park can range up to $820. So the cost is very expensive over the last several years. It's just increased. And of course, the cost of a new home is on the increase, especially around here in HRM. So I've really had a lot of requests or input on that side of the cost of housing in our area, especially here in HRM. So I want to draw the attention or go to the questioning of shelter allowances, and especially the people on assistance are really finding it hard to find affordable, decent housing, especially in the city with such an increase in rent and population. Working over the years in my former profession, I've been into many homes, many apartments, and I find the people that really need our help and that are on assistance are finding themselves living in conditions that I wouldn't put on anybody. And so I want to ask the Minister about the allowances that you give here. Do you think or the amounts that you prescribe, like the one family, say one size, $235, is a reasonable amount given the conditions of the rents in the province today?
Thank you for the question. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Honourable Member. The amount of the shelter allowance is a matter of concern. Just to put it into some perspective, of the 32,800 odd cases that we have on employment support and income assistance, about 12,000 of those are using their maximum shelter allowance. So that clearly would suggest that there is a problem. It's a problem that I think is going to grow unless it requires some attention, and we are looking to ways of trying to adjust this in a way that would be seen as being fair across the province, but to address those hot markets such as HRM, Antigonish, Wolfville, all university towns, incidentally, which seems to have a lot of demand for housing. With regards to the various shelter allowances, it depends on your family circumstance. The member opposite, I was giving some acknowledgement of that. It's $235 for a single able-bodied unemployed person. If that person happens to have a disability, there's a $300 supplement, making it $535. For a family of two, it's $550. For a family of three, it goes to $600. But even those numbers are difficult in some of these markets. So the member's point is well taken, and staff have been asked to try to come forward with a proposal that would in essence try to address this growing problem in some of the more prosperous parts of the province.
Thank you, Minister. I'll recognize the Honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this should go pretty well because you just kind of answered one of the next questions was, are you considering looking at demographic or geography in the province? Because, in some areas of the province, it is a lot cheaper to find housing compared to some other areas. So I'm encouraged by that, and I look forward to it, and we'll make sure we hold you to the word that we'll be looking at some kind of consideration for the areas in our province, especially for our students, because as you're aware, how the increased cost of tuition plus the housing is a great deterrence for people deciding on seeking higher education. So I want to also look at the under your policies and just a few brief questions on that. And I was reading through it, and I came to one with the policy on single expectant mothers shelter allowance, and I had some concerns with that, where it says that over the age of 19 in her 7th month, they may qualify for additional allowances to push them up to, and I'm just using the figures of the 235. I'm sure the member for our critic, or the critic area in disability, will get into that section. But you will allow a single mother who is expecting in her 7th month, which is her 3rd trimester, to getting allowed for an increase to $550. I'm just wondering, with that where did you come about with that number? Have you addressed the month that the expectant mother is in over the last several years, or has that been a policy for years? And I'm just wondering if you're looking at maybe changing that, because as coming from my profession, someone in the 7th month, I mean, that's an important stage, and to see that increase then, it's important, and I'm glad it's there, but I would think maybe earlier in the pregnancy so they can find affordable or maybe a decent housing for their child, and not just towards the end of their pregnancy. So are you looking at maybe changing that, or how long has this policy been in place? Is it maybe outdated and we could look at it?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As the member would be aware, August the 1st of 2001, we came in with the Employment Support and Income Assistance Program. So, in essence, all policies go forward from that date, although some may have been drawn from the old Family Benefits Program or maybe even from the municipal social assistance programs. And the member's quite right. There is a recognition that as an expectant mother is moving on into her term, that provision has been made to allow for a move to accommodations that would be more suitable for a family as opposed to a single person. And at this point in time, $550 is the new shelter allowance.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because as I pointed out earlier, even if you want to look at, especially in the city here, a 2-bedroom is $650. So they're really finding themselves in a difficult situation, especially if it's a single mother or a single expected mother who may be out on her own trying to find a more suitable environment to raise their children in. So I just want to ask maybe some more questions on some policies, and under the renters and homeowners, I notice here that you encourage the applicant or the recipient of assistance to try to seek shelter in that includes heat, and so that they can benefit more from their monthly allowance. So I'm wondering, with the conditions we've seen over the last couple of years in the winter and the heating costs rising over the last several years, are you looking at maybe coming in with something that will assist them, not 12 months a year, but on those peak months when the cost of heating your place is quite expensive, and where we see the trend of where they, if you want to say, robbing Peter to pay Paul when it comes to rent and heat and stuff. So, are you looking at some kind of policy this winter for to help with the increased costs of heating?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
The member opposite brings up a subject that I suspect all MLAs and anybody that deals with trying to assist perhaps some of those that are more vulnerable in society would encounter through the winter months, and getting those telephone calls where the oil tank is either empty or about to be empty, and really there's no means to fill it up again. I appreciate the honourable member's suggestion, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask that my communications director take that back and make sure that that is one of the considerations when the new policy comes forward for consideration. And I thank the honourable member for his suggestion. It's totally appropriate.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Okay, so now I might want to turn to the affordable housing agreement, and when that was signed in 2002, I believe, in September. I'm just wondering, since the federal government back in the early 90s decided that it was their time to get back into, or get out of housing and download it onto the provinces, and I'm wondering if when this agreement came about, who were the players that decided this agreement? Like, how did this $37 million come about? Who were the main players, and how did we reach that figure of $37 million for this agreement?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
The member opposite has a good appreciation of what has happened in public housing, social housing. The federal government did pull out in about 1993, and this was a unilateral decision on their part. It was offered to the provinces to continue on with the existing agreements. The agreements expire in 2035, the last one, and a lot of these agreements in essence are picking up the mortgage payments on public housing units, but that does not cover the full cost of providing the housing, because actually the rentals that are paid for public housing, which is often based on a rent-to-income formula, they would not be enough to cover the operating costs on their own. It's the subsidy that's required is actually more than just the cost of the mortgage. So the member has prefaced his question well, and as I've said on numerous occasions here and with federal counterparts during announcements, this is a positive development to see the federal government recognize that they do have a role to play in providing affordable housing. We welcome them back. They came up with the number of $680 million. They distributed across the country on a per capita basis. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best way of distributing those monies, but perhaps the member would have some comments about the rationale for that formula.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just looking through in the past at the agreements, I mean, they do range from $177 million for the larger provinces like BC to $5 million like PEI. But we seem to kind of draw our province and paralleled with Manitoba in a lot of issues, especially before I was here, with the same size, same population. So I just had a bit of concerns on did we shortchange ourselves by settling with a $37 million agreement where Manitoba's $50 million agreement. So I'm just wondering, was it the province's intention to go in there with a certain amount of money, and that's all we could afford, so that's why the agreement is maybe 37 instead of maybe 50 million like Manitoba?
No, it's allocated. Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
The 680 million was a number that came about courtesy of the federal government. They brought it forward. It was a straight per capita calculation. I believe the population of Manitoba is slightly more than 1 million, so they would, just using that formula, in fact, get a larger allocation. They've also come back with a Part 2 to the affordable housing program, topping it up to $1 billion federal commitment. But until we finish digesting the first component, I think that it would be a little ambitious to start making plans for the second, although the honourable member would perhaps be aware that as it pertains to the second component, his honourable colleague from Dartmouth North brought up in the House in last year's question period the subject of Shannon Park, which the member might be aware has been in the news recently. There are many ideas as to what should happen with that property, but there does seem to be some agreement between the federal minister for Nova Scotia, the Minister of Community Services, and I feel that the member from Dartmouth North as to what should happen with those units. And I would also suggest that my discussions with the Mayor of Halifax have been very constructive, and the Mayor also is quite compassionate when it comes to providing affordable housing.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and definitely the member, my member from Dartmouth North, will definitely be mentioning that. But ironically enough, I have over the years gone into those facilities over in Shannon Park, and it's amazing that when I got the call there's so few of those units being used, and I thought it's a great opportunity to address a large number, and I hope the work with that will continue. I want to ask about our portion, the $18.6 million that we have to come up with. I'm wondering what is your prediction on how much you're going to seek from nonprofit or the private sector, in turn answering my second question on how much do you expect our province or the government to pay that out of that $18.6 million? What's your prediction on how much we're going to be covered for, and how much are you going to try to get from nonprofit or private sector?
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank the member for his question. The plan is to split that off into 4 different components, but I think that the member is specifically referring to additional rental units. Or, I mean, I can expand the answer to include more than that, but in terms of the number of new rental units and the provincial contribution, it will depend in part on what we get back in response to the request for proposals. Now, over and above that, we've got a home preservation program, which I was referencing the other day. This is for the amounts that are greater than what is qualified for under RAP, the rural, the residential. One more time, Honourable Member. The Residential Rehabilitation Assistance Program. He's a good member, which is capped at $16,000, Honourable Member. So the Home Preservation Program takes on applications that are larger than that, because there's really no point in going in and spending $16,000 to fix up a house if the job requires 25, or even if it requires 19, and the part that doesn't get done is the roof, as an example. So this is an attempt to try to preserve housing stock. In addition to that, there's the program to encourage home ownership, which is the program that identifies areas for urban renewal and assists low to mid-income Nova Scotians to acquire their own homes. And the last component, which is a very important component and comprises approximately 25% of the $37.26 million, is the component to work with landlords to upgrade the quality of their accommodations. And that's something that also really involves the municipalities in a sense, because they're the ones that have taken an interest, a responsibility for maintaining a certain quality of rental unit. And that is a challenge that I know that the Mayor and the Halifax Council, as an example, are wrestling with, because some of the more challenging situations are right here in the city, and the challenge becomes, at what point in time do you say that your accommodations just do not meet the standards, and so therefore we're going to shut you down, when the flip side of that is that you may be putting people out in the street. So it's a delicate balance, and those are the four components to the affordable housing program.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a simple question, maybe one figure. How much provincial dollars will be spent this year on housing in the province? How much provincial dollars will be spent this year or allocated this year for housing?
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Service.
The provincial component is made up of both a capital commitment and an ongoing increase in the subsidized housing, and that's the component that is going to trigger the most expansion in the availability of affordable housing, because that's where we go in and we basically supplement the rent that low-income Nova Scotians are able to pay to their landlord, and it could be to the tune of $250 a month to bring them in line with what is deemed to be affordable. In total, well, actually, it's 2.65 million because there was $1 million there increase in the year before.
That's our share.
Yeah. No, but 2.65 is the provincial share going into affordable housing this year, correct? But that's additional money.
No, that's the total.
Okay. Anyways, Honourable Member, the total that's expected in gross to be expended on affordable housing using the drawdown in the federal component, which is matched by provincial dollars, or the net present value of increase in provincial rent subsidies, is $7.5 million, actually $7,550,000 this year, plus whatever else is contributed by other housing partners.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if, since you have some figures there in front of you, if you could tell me how much of provincial dollars will go into social housing this year.
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yeah, Honourable Member, we're trying to basically dissect the components that may go to the affordable housing program, the components that may go to the rural residential assistance program, the dollars that may go to various other components of housing services. Those are just a couple of them. But the provincial net expenditure is $13,175,000. But again, that's a bit of a composite number, so it would take some distillation to break it down into the various components.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Mr. Chair, I would love if your office and your department could break that down and get some information back to us on especially the social housing section of it, if you could. So I want to turn quickly to when the agreement was signed and the federal government said that they were going to get back into assisting our provinces with affordable housing. There was a reserve fund set up with that. I wonder if you could just tell me the purpose of that reserve fund and how much was it when it was initially set up.
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Would the member be referring to the Federal Reserve Deferred Contribution Account? That's in the Nova Scotia Housing Development Corporation?
Want to respond to the question from the minister? For clarification?
Sure.
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. It was my understanding that when they downloaded the housing to the provinces again, there was a reserve fund set up in case of destruction or disaster that would help us replenish or fix up any existing stock at that time. So was there a fund set up initially in that capacity?
Thank you, member. Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I thought that was the fund you were referring to. That is the Deferred Federal Contribution Account. And you're right that when the agreement was turned over to the province, things like identified likely bad debts were quantified and provision was made at that time. There have been other good things about the province taking over housing services. There have been some economies, and in fact, as a result of this, that account has built up, and plus periodically, as I have made reference to before in this chamber and with the media, the province has periodically actually augmented that account with fairly significant deposits.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So earlier or later last year, we heard that there was a cut towards community services, but yet the minister stated that there was going to be no cuts in services in his department. And it's my understanding that funds were taken from that fund. I'm just wondering. What do you foresee in the next year? Any possible use for this fund, or are you going to draw any more down on that, or is it going to be untouched until next year?
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Honourable Member. Just to put this in perspective, just because there's money in that account does not mean the money originated with the federal government. As I indicated before, there have been significant deposits into that account, and that was in the last fiscal year too, wasn't it?
Yes.
So, in 03-04, there were additional deposits into that account, provincial deposits into that account, to the tune of some $12.5 million, so that when we had to draw down to meet our commitment to bringing in the balanced budget, you're right, $4.5 million of the $5.8 million came from that account. But I would argue that those were provincial monies that were set aside for a rainy day, and indeed we had a rainy day.
Thank you, Minister. I recognize the Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
So I'm just wondering, have we used that fund for any other reason other than that $4.5 million that that the department needed to find with the cuts? Has there been any other money taken from that for any other reasons, repairs to public housing, seniors complexes, or anything like that?
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Honourable Member. The use to which those monies can be used is defined under the Social Housing Agreement. So there are restrictions on what can happen with those monies. So whatever uses they're put to have to be agreed to between the province and Central Mortgage and Housing, or I guess the Nova Scotia Housing Development Corporation and Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Minister. Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
So what was their reaction this year when the province had to go into that fund and deplete it or take $4.5 million from it?
Thank you, Member. The Minister of Community Services.
The answer. Yes, thank you, Honourable Member. The federal government, through Central Mortgage and Housing, expects its partners to live up to their agreements, and we've lived up to the agreement, and they were willing to accommodate our concerns within those within that framework.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I want to just turn a little bit to our seniors in our province and the complexes that many of them live in today. As housing critic, I've traveled around to many of these complexes throughout our province and seen some of the conditions that these are in. They do have a lot of concerns with air quality and no elevators in a lot of these senior complexes. So I'm just wondering, with the need, which I heard a lot during the election, of seniors housing, or adequate senior housing in this province, is there any expenditures foreseen in this year, upcoming year, on increasing the stock of public housing towards our seniors complexes?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Honourable Member, and that will be forthcoming as a result of the request for proposals. We did do a very extensive research and analysis into the housing stock across the province, trying to identify the areas of greatest need so that when the request for proposals come forward, we can do some sort of value assessment that the greatest benefit is being derived by those monies. The honourable member was asking before about the deferred federal contribution account and made mention of exhausting the account. I want to assure the honourable member that in fact the account as of March the 31st, 2004 is at approximately $23.5 million, and a significant number of those dollars would be provincial contributions. So I do not want to leave Nova Scotians with the idea that in any way have we depleted that account.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I understand it's $23.5 million today, or as of March, but I understand just within a year it increased dramatically. So we have to be cautious that next year it could deplete as much as it increased. So a quick question on the RAP programs that we see. Do you keep track of those grants that or applications that were turned down by region, or is it all under one umbrella? Are you able to give me figures that from region to region or housing authority to housing authority on who is applying and who's been denied?
Thank you, member, for the question. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Just for greater clarification, we've got two entities that are delivering housing services in the province on behalf of the department. One, we've got the 7 housing authorities, which are scattered across the province, and they're the ones that actually hold and manage the housing stock, those the public housing units, and they do have some other functions, but housing services, which is aligned with the 4 regions in the province, are the ones that deliver those sorts of programs, including the Rural Residential Assistance Program. So that sort of decision would be made in the regions, and presumably when somebody applies, there's a file kept, and it would be possible to go through those files. I'm not sure that I'm anxious to give that sort of job out to the staff and take them away from hopefully approving applications, but the information would be out there in the 4 regions.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to actually give my remaining time to the member from Dartmouth North, and I hope to get back and maybe have some more questions for the Minister.
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Minister, Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr.
Recognize,
Minister, before I start, I just want to thank my honorable colleague from Dartmouth South Portland Valley, who's the critic for community services, and my honorable member from Sackville-Cobequid, who is the critic for housing, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you, Mr. Minister, on